In this lesson, I want to talk a little bit about adjustment layers. I don't want to go too in depth with them. They are a big process of my painting and also my personal workflow and also for work. But the reason being for my course, Essentials of Painting, I want you to get good at picking colors at the right value, saturation, and temperature before relying on things like adjustment layers. But I'll go over what they are and everything. So, basically, I have this image pulled up right here, and this is a painting of mine. And I did this painting first on heavy paint, and this is how it looked like. And then I painted on top with Photoshop a little bit more and added some actual painting strokes. And then usually what I have is a folder called effects. That's usually a bunch of adjustment layers. So adjustment layers are this button right here. It looks like a circle cut in half, dark and light. If you click on that, let me move this up a little bit. Hold on. Well, I can't. Some of my stuff is getting cut off. Okay, so if I click on here, you see things like levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue, saturation, color, and balance. There's a lot. And I use them to enhance my painting a little bit more. So I'm just going to see if I can keep moving this up because it looks like my screen is cutting it off. So you can see a little bit more. All right, let's do that again. And there you go. Now everything I think you can see. Okay, so the ones I like to use the most are brightness and contrast, levels, curves, exposure, sometimes vibrance, hue, saturation, and color balance. So I'll go over them all a little bit and how I use them for my paintings. But you can see just in this painting, for example, if I turn these on and off, you can see that I use levels to lighten a certain area. And with this comes masks, right? So we just learned about masks. I like to turn my adjustment layer off and then paint the area I want. So you can see here what I did with this adjustment layer was I actually was light. I wanted to add some mist and lighten some areas. So what I did was I dragged this up to lighten, and then basically it's only affecting the area that I have white. And I also used a soft brush to get a really nice soft edge. Okay. And I'll show you how to recreate this, but I also talk about this a lot more in depth in my course. Color balance, you can see I just added slight purple. Okay. So really what I did was my color balance. If I click here, you can see what I did. I shifted it towards purple. And you can see the more I do it, the more obvious it is. But I just wanted a little bit just to get some purple, warmer temperatures. Color balance is a great way for me to just get little slight inflections of color temperature shifts without having actually to paint it. So it's kind of a cheat. So I want it warmer or cooler, whatever. I just play around, shift it. Right now, I just want some hints of purple. And then you can see I just exit out and I like to turn it black. So I like to turn the whole mask off and then just paint in the parts that I want. So you can see the areas that are wispy white, it's affecting just the areas around here and here. Okay. Now I have another color balance too. I can do as many color balances as I want. This time, I guess I affected my highlights. So I really warmed up the highlights. Again, I can push it. I'm just showing you what I did, which areas it's affecting to make it more obvious, but obviously I wanted a little bit more toned down. I also warmed up the highlights a little bit, but not too much. And also warmed it up here to the reds. So very, very little. And then again, I turned it black. I actually work inversely, and then I paint in the areas that I want it to affect. So again, if we press shift, that's going to take it out. So that's like this adjustment layer was never there. But if I press shift again, now you can see the effect of that adjustment layer. And these are just masks with the adjustment layer. So you can see if I turn these on, they're very subtle changes. They're not a lot, but I love to play around with this because I love to see how subtle changes can really, affect a painting. Not sure what this is. I'm going to delete that. So you can see that with the effects, this was how it was before. And then with the effects, just adding some subtlety. Now, I think this is fine as is. This is, it's not like I needed to, but it's just fun to play around sometimes. So that was all done using adjustment layers, which is again found, um, I'm gonna shrink this right here. Okay. So we'll go over each one of them really quickly. And I have this other really simple demo right here. So I have this pair, and we're going to use clipping masks and everything else we practice to kind of play around with adjustment layers. So I'm going to go here, and the first thing I want to do is I want to add a semblance of light and shadow. And with that, I use levels. I do this all the time for color keys, actually. So if you're interested in my color key process, I have mentorships at Sentient where I go over this whole process, and also my digital painting foundations mentorship at Sentient as well. I go over all this, but I use this a lot. So I'm going to clip this levels layer to my main shape right here. And I'm going to drag this down. This will make it everything darker. And it's kind of like essentially mixing white into it. Okay. Or sorry, black. Like I'm mixing a shade of this base color that I had. So I can work two ways. Okay. What I can do is I can flip this. And remember, if I press um, option, oops, sorry, I turned off the mask. So I accidentally deleted the mask. So if that happens, just click here, this mask, remember that's mask, and then it'll pop back up. So let's say I want to take out the effect of the levels first. I darken everything. So that's option delete. You can see now none that this levels adjustment layer isn't showing at all because I filled it with black. I want to do that because I want to be able to now flip this back white. And I want to be able to now brush in my shadow with a soft brush. So I'm just taking a regular soft brush and I'm brushing it in. Now in 2 seconds, we have light and shadow. Okay. So I always do this actually as a really quick first pass to get a quick pass of light and shadow to be able to see how I can push the painting more. Now I can also do this the other way. So let's say I filled this all with white, meaning the whole levels, this levels adjustment layer is affecting this whole thing. And what I can do now is I can work the other way. I can erase this adjustment layer to reveal the light. Okay. So whatever works your boat, whatever makes sense more with your brain, do whatever makes sense. I like to work the first way. I don't know why. I go back and forth, but I like to fill it with black and then be able to adjust what I want the adjustment layer to be able to adjust how much I want the adjustment layer to show. So that's levels. Okay. Now brightness and contrast works kind of similar, so I'll just play around with that a little bit. If I do brightness and I clip it to this shape, you can see that it makes everything brighter. So you're kind of effectively mixing white into the light and shadow, effectively, blowing it out a little bit, making it more high key. So maybe I want that, but only for a certain area. So let's just do that. So again, I'm going to flip this back to black, option delete to essentially erase it, the effects of it. And I want to paint that back in. So maybe let's pick another brush, maybe, I don't know, shape carver or something. And I want to paint a highlight. Okay, so I want to do that. So now basically, because I brightened everything, it's it's kind of I'm basically, you can see in my mask, only that part is revealing the adjustment layer. So maybe I want to do that and I'll leave it at that. Now I could always do another brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and I can also build up the contrast. Now I don't really like to play with this. It kind of saturates everything, as you can see. So my shadows get saturated, the light gets saturated. Maybe I want it just a little bit. Okay, so maybe I want it to just saturate the light side a little bit, but I want to keep the shadow side more desaturated. So what do? Flip this to black. And then I'm going to erase this part with a soft brush. I'm not using the eraser tool. Remember, you have to be on your brush tool, not the eraser tool. So make sure you're on B, brush tool. So now, basically, you see before, I've only saturated the light part and I've desaturated the shadow a little bit. So that's a kind of a fun way to do that. We can do curves as well. So should we do curves or color balance first? Let's do color balance first, and then we'll go back to curves. So with color balance, this is fun because with color balance, you can adjust your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights. Now, I like to actually have three separate adjustment layers of color balance for each area. So like one adjustment layer for the shadows, one for the midtones, and one for the highlights. So let's just play around with midtones for now. That's usually the default at where it's at. And it's going to adjust all your midtones to how you want it. So I'm just going to be really drastic. So a lot of my colors are midtones, so it looks like it's affecting everything. So let's say, I don't know, I want the core shadow to be a little bit warmer, more purple, and whatever, and maybe a little bit blue. So I'm gonna exit out. There's no OK button, just exit out and it's already committed. So it's kind of turned everything, and you can turn this on and off to see kind of what you've done. I'm like, I don't like that, but I maybe just want my core shadow a little bit warmer, and I don't want this bounce light area to be as warm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually turn it off because the majority of this, I don't want this adjustment layer to affect it. So I find it easier to turn it all off and then flip it to white and then paint in just the area I want this adjustment layer to affect. So I'm just warming up the core shadow a little bit. And if you don't know what a core shadow is, you should take my course because I go over all that. So now I get a nice, slightly warmer core shadow right here. And then let's do another adjustment layer. So I go click here again, go to color balance, and this time I want to affect my highlights. Let's see what that does. It's probably going to affect everything, but you can see it's making the light extra warm. I'm just going to be really drastic. Let's see what happens when we drag it here. You can see it's kind of turned the light now bluish. If I drag it here, now it's very green. And I go, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like maybe I can add some greenish tones to the light. I don't know. Let's just do something drastic and play around with that. So I'm going to turn it off, and then I'm going to flip this back to white. So there's always two steps to that. And then, I don't know, let's just take another brush, and I want to start brushing in some of the effects of that green. Not everywhere, just in some places, okay? And you can see the cool thing with adjustment layers is that I can choose any brush I want. And essentially, I'm also painting in textures. Like if I paint this, you can see now I got a greenish texture right there, right? And I'm adding these plane dimensions to this pear. Okay, so, oh, I didn't clip it to this, so make sure you clip it to that. And I can do this as many times as I want. Like maybe I want some areas in the light highlights that are warmer. So obviously that's very warm. I like to, again, Option Delete, fill it with black. Make sure you do Option Command G, clip it, flip this back to white. And then maybe now I want to just brush in some of these electric warmth. And I'm using this kind of textured watercolor brush. And you can see it's very subtle, but it's there. And I'm also adding texture, okay? So you can do that as many times as you want. And maybe I'm going to do one last one because I want to add a really cool bounce light color. So I'm going to go to shadows and maybe I'm going to add like a kind of cyanic bounce light, okay? So again, I'm going to turn it black, fill it uh, essentially, I don't know what the correct term would be, like nulling the mask for now, and then now I'm going to bring it back. So I'm going to clip it, Option Command G, it's clipped it, and now I just want that greenish color right here. So I'm going to brush it in. So now it's like this kind of bounce light is coming in from that side. And there we have it. And if you want to see where you came from, just turn off the layers. And this is kind of fun to do, right? We started off with a solid color. Now we can go boop, 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 boop. And look at that. We've created a pretty juicy pear. Again, if I want to adjust this parent shape, no problem. Just start, you know, I can use an eraser tool in this case because that serves as eraser. I don't usually use the eraser. Actually, I'm curious if oh, so actually I didn't know this. Well, I did know, I just don't use it. If you flip your pen around, this part, you can actually erase. That's actually kind of cool, and I don't ever use it because I use masks most of the time. So I'm actually have flipped my pen over and I've erased it, but I actually don't like that. So I'm just Control Zing, just getting a kind of smoother edge a little bit. Now remember, not all my brushes can, in my brush preset, can act as an eraser and a brush. So the ones that have this B, this or this icon brush, they can only be brushes. So if you press E, it's going to go back to this brush because this can only be a brush. I didn't um, make that brush. So I can cut into that shape as well. Now let's keep going back to adjustment layers. Let's play with hue and saturation. Sometimes if you press colorize, it's going to colorize your whole thing. And I don't usually want that, but you can play around with that. You can adjust the saturation. Right now it's colorized it with the red hue, right? You can change the hue here and just colorize the whole thing, but we don't want that. So let's uncheck that, right? We like our colors. Over here, you can play with some of these presets, but I never really do that. Increase saturation more. But you can play around with it, right? Don't sepia. I just go to default. So usually if you leave that as default, that's fine. With master, sometimes you can play specifically. With master, you're going to be adjusting like everything. But sometimes if you just want to isolate a certain area, like the reds, in this painting, then I can just play with the reds and you can see the reds are just being saturated, but everything else is remaining the same. So maybe I want that, maybe I don't, right? So I can play around with that. Maybe the yellows now I want to be more saturated. So now you can see anywhere where there's yellow, I'm playing around. I can also change the hue, okay? So let's say in the yellows, I actually want to change the hue to something else. You can do that as well and get some pretty funky results. So just play around with this a little bit. Greens as well. I usually just stick with master, and then maybe I want to lift up the saturation a little bit, tone down the saturation a little bit. Um, Sometimes I'll do this to get some grays. So I don't know, let's just play around with that. Option delete. And I actually want to maybe bring in some grays into the shadow. So I'm just going to use my soft brush, brush it in. Now that feels like there's some ambient light right there. And all I did was a hue saturation um, adjustment layer. If you don't know what ambient light is, you should also take my course. So that was hue saturation. And I haven't gone over all what it can do, but I suggest you play around and have fun. That's really the best way to learn. Curves is another fun one. Now, curves I don't use a lot because if you basically drag this, it's going to crunch your values really dark. And then if you drag this up, it's going to crunch your values really light. Just crunch, yeah. So you get this kind of extreme crunching of values. I like to sometimes just do this to add slightly more contrast, and I won't drag it too much more down or up. So usually I'll do something like this. Lately, I've been kind of dragging both down to kind of get these really cool new color palettes that I wouldn't have thought of before. So just play with seeing, just play around and see like what you can do to, if you drag this down. I mean, that gives some crazy results. I can't explain to you scientifically what's happening, but I can tell you what I like to do. The other cool thing is if you go here, not here, sorry, here to RGB and you drop down, make this bigger, and you drop down, you can actually independently lift up the color or take away the color. So if you go to the reds, you're going to saturate the reds a little bit more if you lift it up above the line. If you bring it down, it's actually going to bring it down to the greens a little bit more. Okay, so play around with that a little bit. Sometimes if something's too warm, I'll go to the reds and I'll just bring it down, just strip down a little bit of that red in my painting. So maybe I want something like that. I can also do that to the greens. Let's say I want to lift up the greens and, you know, um, do that. Or if I strip down the green, it's going to turn it to red. Okay, the complementary color. And then blue, I can lift up blue or I can strip down the blue and it's going to bring more orange back in. So let's say I'm like, oh no, I didn't want that. What do I do? That's okay. Just press delete and it's gone. But I don't know, maybe we can just push the contrast a little bit. So I'm just going to do that. I just slightly brought it down below the curve in this first point. And if you just start hovering over, it's going to create a anchor point and you can drag down. So I'm just hovering over and then it's going to create an anchor point. You can create as many as you want. Oh, it starts to get a little funky, as you can see. And if I just hover over and delete it, I can just delete all the anchor points that I made. So just click on it and delete, lift. So I'm gonna, oops, bring some of the shadows down and then just pop some of the lights just a little bit more. And it's subtle, but it did something. Okay. Now I have my leaf on another layer, which is why it's not affecting anything. And exposure, I don't use this one too much, but exposure, it just overexposes everything. Offset, it almost just kind of grays out everything. So you can play around with this a little bit as well. And you're, kind of changing the relationship of values as well as the whole value structure. So maybe I do this and I go, I kind of like how the light is being exposed, but I don't like how the shadows are being exposed. So I only want it to affect the light. So I'm going to turn it off, fill it with black, and I'm going to paint in just this area. Like I want the highlight to have a glow, just that glow. And sometimes I use exposure to do that. Okay. So look, I have 9 adjustment layers, and I didn't do any painting. I just had a base layer and I just created a 3D looking pear without any base painting, without painting. With this being said, I still do like to do some good old painting. So I'll maybe, add a highlight right there. Maybe I'll just add my own, like, my own color sense and add some purples and whatnot. So I still paint on top of everything sometimes. But adjustment layers can get you a long way. Okay, I can turn this on and off. With that being said, I would prefer that you get good at choosing colors first and not relying on adjustment layers because sometimes I find students they rely on this. And then when it comes to actually painting from life or understanding how light temperature works and affects your colors, how a sunny day works versus an overcast day, how the temperature of sunrise is different from temperature of the sun during the light of the sun during the day, right? Sunrise is warmer, sunset is warmer. I find that people who rely on adjustment layers, they don't tend to understand that as much and they're more good at copying photos, but then they don't know how to push it past the photo further. Okay. So adjustment layers for me, like I said, is a last caveat. Okay. I like to use it at the end to just push colors just a little bit more. Like you can see here, this is my painting, but I just use it to just push some values and contrast a little bit more. Okay. So I would really want you to get good at really seeing and thinking like a painter and understanding really how things work from the ground up, and then using adjustment layers as an extra cherry on top kind of thing. Um, so yeah. But with that being said, I just wanted to do a quick overview to show how I use adjustment layers.